Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of KFactor. So I'm Ramy Sedra. I'm your host, and I'm pretty excited today. We've got a good friend, colleague on the show, Trevor Panas. Trevor, welcome to KFactor.
Hey, thanks, Ramy. Happy to join.
So, before we deep dive into our topic today, for people that don't know you, Trev, you've been in the ready mix business for a long time. I know I always ask this question, but what is it you love about the business?
For me, I love the construction industry in general. The building industry is really a people industry. It's people building schools, roads, hospitals, houses for other people.
Right.
We are our own buildings, right? And what I love about Ready Mix in particular, I think, is just the fast pace. I like to make the joke. It's like organ donation married to air traffic control, in that you've got this perishable product that's being delivered to potentially hundreds of job sites over hundreds or even 1,000 different loads in a day, depending on the size of the business. So it's you know and it presents a lot of opportunity, right? Each load's got to be on time and in spec. So for producers who really solve that that challenge, there's lots of opportunity for them.
Um, Now, folks who don't know that, you were on a pretty fast-paced career trajectory in your previous life and, doing great in that business. And here you go, leaving, 20 plus years of experience in ready mix, jumping ship and joining us.
Well, actually, for me, I saw it more of a way as to scale some of the processes I had built as a general manager. Ready Mix is a very hectic business. There's a lot of day to day pressure and fires to put out. Thin margins combined with relatively high risk and liability if you don't do it right. And so, as a survival mechanism, as a GM, I became very, very process driven, very data driven. Whether that was with quality and technical services, whether it was with sales, whether it was operations. For me, it was very process oriented.
Right.
And I saw C60 as an opportunity to scale some of those tools and processes that I built and that I was passionate about, and take those to the wider industry.
That's fascinating. So for you, it was all about, look, I've been marrying my knowledge of the industry and how to run a ready mix business. I've been marrying that with applying data. Why don't I join a company that's actually taking that very same concept to the broader industry? So it's pretty fascinating. Um, I've been hearing kind of like the industry is maybe a couple of years ago. I've been hearing the industry is facing headwinds. Now less so. I'm hearing more that there's lots of opportunity, but that there are new challenges to drive profitability. Um, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what you think some of those new challenges that producers are facing, and why does that make it harder for them to drive profitability nowadays?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. In that, it's not so much headwinds as it is different challenges now. The industry overall is, it's doing fairly well in most parts of the US and Canada. So, you've got producers who are really focused on capitalizing on those market opportunities. The construction sector seems to be strong. So
Right.
there's not so much headwinds as the industry, but we have come up with some new challenges that I think are getting more acute. There's big challenges in finding and retaining experienced staff that really knows the industry, right? The days of having a dispatcher who's been with you for 35 years and just knows how to maximize your fleet productivity, those are gone. Experienced sales reps and sales managers who understand how to analyze risk and evaluate the impact of how their sales impact both costs and profitability, as opposed to simply looking at, average selling price and top line revenue, those guys are harder to come by as well. Those kind of old hands, salty dogs, so to speak, they're
Right.
retiring. And same thing with even, you think of technical services managers, a good QC person, a good QC manager, they're really your product owners. And if they do it right, they'll optimize not just your costs, but your
Right.
product performance, so that your products performing consistently, doing all the things that your customers wanted to do, none of the things they don't like. you know those are the challenges, is finding those people, because they're retiring and the new folks coming up, they don't have the experience. So the headwinds are really, how do I replace decades and sometimes centuries of combined experience in the business? And to do that, producers really have to look at how do they leverage new tools and technologies to help train and empower that next generation.
I wonder if there's some, like if you were giving advice, right, to, uh, maybe an earlier version of yourself in your career, or to a producer that's maybe facing some of these challenges, if you're going to give them some advice on how to solve some of these day-to-day challenges, you know, what advice would you give them? Because I mean, it sounds like some of what you're saying is related to, continuously improving the business. Sounds like, with the lack of experience, is it trial and error? Um, how do you handle this?
Well, I wouldn't. You don't want to do too much trial and error, although that's going to happen, right? What I think that people coming up in the business, whether they're sales managers or general managers, whatever that looks like for them, you're always going to have the day-to-day firefight of ready mix. I think the key is to put strong processes in place to try and keep the fires small and contained, and then the time that you free up for yourself from that, um, after you've kind of contained those fires and you've built processes so they don't get out of control and consume your whole day, then you got to focus on the big levers, right? Your time is limited, so you've got to really make sure you focus on what matters. um, Focus on the big profit drivers in the business: material costs, delivery
Right.
efficiency, getting the right volume at the right price, at the right margins, to optimize the margins. And obviously, if you're at a senior level, you've got to be thinking year to year as well, right? So year to year, it's really about making sure you've got the right assets, the right people in the right markets, and understanding your niche in that market, in those markets. But day to day, it's really focus on maximizing your costs and revenue out of materials, delivery, and sales.
Interesting. So if we deep dive a little bit on delivery, right? Maybe we start with delivery efficiency. Can you peel that back for our viewers a little bit and kind of dig into some of the concepts that you're referring to here?
Delivery always sounds simple, but it maybe is one of the most complex things in the business, just because of, again, the whole air traffic control and organ donation that you're dealing with in our industry. But delivery efficiency is really at its focus about how can I deliver the most concrete with the least number of trucks and still keep my customers happy. And that really boils down to what we call, the big four things, like focusing on round trip time, average load size, loads per day, and then making sure your trucks are getting used a large percentage of your working days and not parked against the fence 2 or 3 weeks out of the month.
I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but this just sounds like, good business management, good common sense. Um, I mean, why aren't producers doing this every single day? Or maybe they are.
Well, you're right. I think they are, right? They are doing it now. But again, this is a busy industry that tends to run very lean. And there's many different things that impact these delivery efficiencies, right? Let's take one for example. Let's take round trip
Okay.
time and load size.
Right.
Those are two things that are primarily customer driven. That your average load size is driven by the type of work you take on. Your round trip time is often driven by customer behavior, and the location of the job site. But all of that's another way of saying that those delivery costs, those portion of the delivery costs are really driven by sales decisions.
Right.
Like, which customers am I going to take on? Which types of jobs am I going to do?
Right.
And there's also ways to impact those operationally. Obviously, are we over trucking certain jobs and waiting on
Right.
site? Stacking trucks at the pump as a result.
Right.
Are we getting loaded and out of the yard quickly? Those are the operational things. Um, but obviously, it can be from column A or column B, what's impacting those efficiencies.
Right.
So you really need to dig into the root cause of what's driving those delivery costs to be able to take some action. And so getting the data at their fingertips to tell them whether, hey, I've got to take some operational actions here to improve my business, or whether I actually need to put it on my sales team to manage the customers and our what we have in our work backlog to impact our delivery. That's kind of the next step, right?
Um, another another topic you talked to me about earlier was, asset utilization. And, so I can imagine, if you're not utilizing your trucks efficiently, for example, um, maybe there's data that tells you that, but what can you do about it, right? How do you get to like getting to a place where you're using those trucks a little bit more efficiently?
Yeah, and I think that one of the keys to focus on with that is it's not about completely changing um, or spinning 180 degrees in the way that you do business. It's about those small incremental improvements. If you can get your delivery efficiency up by a couple percent, it can have, depending on the size of business, it's tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings a year, right? So when you start thinking about, how many loads per day, what my truck usage is, so how often I have a truck on the road, these are operational levers that you've got to look at, focus on, and pull. Have you worked with your clients in your dispatch to
Hmm.
spread out your work and to flatten that truck demand so that you're not bringing in 20 trucks to handle a surge at 7 a.m. when really what you needed to do was tell that large slab customer that, hey, you're not going to get 70 yards an hour between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. You're going to get 40. And by doing that, you can spread the work, put an extra job in, and all of a sudden, instead of 20 trucks, you needed 19 or 18. That's an enormous difference, right? Going from 20 trucks being able to do it with 19, because now that 20th truck, you can either take on more volume, or maybe you can send that truck to a location that does have more work and volume for it. So you've kind of got more utilization with the same
Right.
number of assets. So keeping
But
your
doesn't
finger on the pulse of that is key.
well, and I think that's a really good point, right? But and it kind of ties into, where I was kind of going next, which is all around sales. Because obviously, if you've got the capacity to deliver, and your sales folks are always trying to get more volume and get the deal. Um, but when you take a step back, like what should producers really be looking for when they're thinking about their markets, they're thinking about margins? Um, would love your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one of the greatest mistakes that some producers make in our business is equating volume directly with profitability. Um, Obviously they are linked, right? But they are not direct one to one. Another big mistake is assuming that a higher ASP is always going to flow through to the bottom line. Often it does, and of course it's strongly correlated, but not always. And what I'm trying to say is the experienced sales managers, they know this, but it's tough to teach newcomers to the industry without the right analytics tools. What you're really after is the right volume at the right price and margins. So just because you have a great ASP isn't going to help your bottom line if you're also driving up your material costs because it's high spec loads. It's not going to help your bottom line if you've got a great ASP, but all of a sudden, you're hauling it an hour and a half away in 5 yard loads, and it takes 2 hours to unload that. So your job as a sales manager is to get the best work in the market, and that means getting the right volume at the right price to make sure you're still making money after you factor in material and delivery costs. It's easy it's easy just to focus on your mom, like your material costs and your selling price. And then just say, hey, my mom or my ASP looks good, and pat yourself on the back.
Well, but it's interesting because you say, okay, you want to go get the volume. Great. I mean, it's easier to tie, I think, the material to the volume of work what you're selling. Um, how does the sales guy figure out, the delivery cost? They're not a logistics expert. And the reality is, I think a lot of producers, at least some of the ones that we've spoken to, tell us they're using either an average delivery cost per hour, or they're just trying to figure the distance to the job. Um, do you think that really is that sufficient, right? When you think about figuring your delivery costs for different types of work, or do you think there's more to it than that?
Well, there's obviously a lot more to it. So, I'd say there's, I see three types of producers out there, and one are using an average delivery cost,
Right.
which just it's not wise business, because your delivery costs can vary by a factor of 20. Like, honestly, between doing a slab job across the street, and doing small, technically difficult, long to unload jobs an hour to town. It can be from $5 a yard to $105 a yard, right? So I think smart producers, they need tools for their, and so there's that. Some people do just use that average, but then you've got producers who are trying to take it up a notch, and they're trying to kind of estimate, hey, um, how far am I going to go? What's my average load size going to be? And then I think really the ones who are doing this really well, they've got the data at their fingertips to look backwards and project forwards. They can look backwards at the last project they did that was X number of miles away, similar type of work, similar crews working on it, and go, hey, it took me this long to get there. I hauled this many yards on average. I
Right.
worked with this crew and they unloaded it this fast. And I'm going to use those numbers to chase the best work in the market by going after jobs that either look like that or don't look like that if it wasn't good from a delivered margins perspective. So
I wonder if there's anything that producers could be doing, day to day, right? Like almost on a daily basis with regards to managing margins. Because I think some of the stuff that you're talking about, I mean, it's obviously important, but it's more, I'd say, medium term, business strategy. But what about like the tactical day to day, like the hand to hand combat that you got to do Monday to Friday, right? Like what are those things that they could be doing?
and there's lots of hand to hand in the ready mix business. So I mean, hey, obviously keeping the sales pipeline full, progressing deals to fill the backlog, that's key to do day to day, week to week, quarter after quarter. But there's simpler things like, and I'll give you an example, like daily checks to make sure you're capturing all your delivery charges, like small load fees,
Right.
distance delivery, waiting time, if that's something that you can charge in your market. So daily checks to make sure that you're offsetting those costs can be a big boost to the margin. So having tools at your fingertips to quickly identify, hey, what were my costs on each individual pour or each job site yesterday, so that you can identify where you made or lost money before you actually send the invoice to the customer. So you can decide whether or not there's anything you need to adjust in terms of, those additional fees. Those really help you. And if you've got something like that that's automated, so it's not a rigorous process, it's not an onerous process to go through that, but it happens almost instantly, and you can just see it and go, yeah, throw on waiting time for this customer, make sure you charge a zone delivery fee to this guy, and be done with it in 5 minutes in the morning.
Right.
It frees your sales teams frees your sales teams up to actually go out and get the work,
Right.
manage the customers, and ultimately match pricing to customer performance.
So it's like, day-to-day hygiene, right? That you're keeping them rigorous. I could see the process in you, bringing that to bear. Um, how about material costs? I mean, I heard you talk a lot about delivery, a lot about sales. Um, I didn't hear you talk much about materials so far. So is this an area where, uh, producers can improve? What do you think?
Both a means to lower costs and improve product performance and customer satisfaction is a giant opportunity that often gets missed in the industry. Materials are your number one cost in the RMC business. I often see simple fixes that can save
Right.
producers tens of thousands of dollars in
Right.
material optimization. And, it's also what your customers care about the most in conjunction with on time deliveries. How's the product performing?
Right. But come on, they must be doing this already. Uh, I mean, it's such a huge part of the cost base, right? So, um, I don't know. I have a hard time believing that they're not all over this.
Well, certainly every producer is on it to some degree, right? They know how to do this stuff, but once again, it's often about having the data and the analytics at your fingertips, so that you can take some action, so that you're not stuck drilling down in Excel files or
Mm.
running reports trying to figure out what your next action is. And so I'll give you some examples.
Okay.
Something as simple as ensuring your mixes are designed to 27 cubic feet per yard. It's something every producer knows how to do, or they wouldn't be in the ready mix business.
Right.
But mixes get changed on the fly all the time, right? They get changed so something pumps better, sets faster, sets slower. It's too
Right.
coarse. I need to change this. So they get changed, and I can't tell you how many times I've sat down at a batch panel, or I've pulled up mix designs in a mix management or QC system, and I've seen mixes that are over yielding by 1 or 2%. So you're giving away 27.5 or 27.6 cubic feet per yard you're actually getting paid for. And whether that comes from just a small amount of over design in the, like, just over yielding in the materials
Right.
because somebody added and subtracted and didn't quite balance it before they went on to batch the next load, or it's things like taking a look at what your air entrainment settings are for your non-air mixes. Are you designing them at 1%? I see it all the time. There's naturally entrained air is at least 1.5, even 2.5% nowadays with modern admixtures. There's no
Right.
such thing as a 1 and barely even a 1.5% non-air load anymore. So there's a percent, in some cases a 1.5% of your material costs that you could be saving. So it's not about the complexity of fixing some of those simple things. It's about identifying it so you can act. You've got thousands of mixes. Nobody's going through them every single day. But if you have a tool that says, "Hey, you're over yielding here,"
Right.
you can get right to the fix.
It makes me think. It almost makes me think like there's just so much detail that some of this stuff just gets lost because there's just too much data or too much information to look at. Um, to pinpoint these things. I don't know if you would agree with that, but it just sounds overwhelming the way you're describing it.
Yeah, again, if you have the right tools and the right processes to kind of make it part of the just your marching order, it's not so big and scary. I mean,
Okay.
again, I could take a whole podcast on the topic of material optimization because it's just such a fantastic topic to dive into. But there's the basics like yield, looking at your design errors for both your non-air and your air and train concrete. Simple things like locking down your batch panels so that not everybody who sits down at it can change
Right.
your mix designs. They can
Right.
have huge impacts from a super simple concept.
Listen, you've kind of given us a great rundown of all these really great, important, and practical things that, you know, producers can focus on. But it kind of does sound like a lot to manage. Um, so, where do you think a producer should start?
With the most money. And I don't mean to be glib by that, right? But you start with the biggest opportunities and execute on them. I think that's one of the great things about our C60 product is, it dollar quantifies some of those big opportunities that you can find across the business,
Right.
so that ranks them for you. And you can start. I think that's why we built the tool the way that we did, and we put in an integrated action tracking tool as well, so that as producers are using it and identifying opportunities, they can highlight one or two or a half a dozen of those key things and then track their progress on them to see how they're saving.
I think that makes perfect sense. Okay, let me, time to test the interviewer here. So, if I recap this, um, I think I kind of captured probably five key things that I got out of today's conversation. The first is, hey, make sure you understand your delivery cost. Um, I think the second one is really try and understand how your customer behavior actually impacts your P&L. Um, the third takeaway that I got from you was, hey, more volume doesn't automatically equal more profit. You said so they're related, but it's not automatic. Um, Number four, um, I think of this as like, pick your spots. So make sure you've got the right work at the right margins, for the right kind of customers and jobs that you're good at or that you focus on, and understanding what that is. I think that's another takeaway that I got. Um, and last but certainly not least, is the show me the money comment that you made, is start with the biggest opportunities, right? The ones that are worth the most to you and your business, and kind of work your way through those. Does that kind of sum it up?
Pretty good memory. Yeah, I think you got that right. The one that we talked about too that maybe didn't get on there, that you didn't mention, would be materials, right?
Right, right.
Really focus on those materials, and it can start with the simple stuff. It doesn't have to start with cement optimization, although it certainly can. But it doesn't have to start there. It can start with the little things in material optimization.
Awesome, awesome. Well, not bad. I got 5 out of 6. So
It's a passing grade. Yeah.
thank you, Professor. um, Trevor, it was great to have you. It's always fun to take time and catch up and talk concrete with you. I learned a ton. Hopefully, our viewers learned a little something today. Um, Friends, give us a like, share, give us comments, give us feedback on any other topics that you'd like us to cover on KFactor. And I do promise we're going to bring Trevor back to the show and talk more about materials. Trevor, thanks again, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was great to be on the show, and we'll talk soon.
Bye, everybody.